that was, dear to me. I didn't know personally, but probably dear to most of you, and we all pretty much have heard about, what had happened to Robin Williams. We may chat about that tonight. So it may go into that world, that sad place sometimes. I'll encourage people that are listening, though, to find the Mark Maron WTF podcast. And that's WTF is the name of the podcast, and it's hosted by Mark Maron. He has a show on there that he did recently with Robin Williams. And it's really sad to a point, and when you can hear the struggle that Robin was experiencing, you can really hear it in that interview with him. But what a great man, an entertainer to all of us, and brought smiles to all of our faces. And it speaks to how much depression and substance abuse can affect all aspects of all types of people from everywhere. Those that have seen success in its greatest reflection. Robin Williams did movies and stand-up and just had one of the longest running careers in the entertainment business. He did more than just entertain as well. But even a giant such as that is affected by depression and substance abuse. And that speaks to the strength of those things. And if we're not careful, what they can do to even the strongest and even the smartest of us. Leo's packing up some of his stuff, and he'll be in here just in a little bit. So I just wanted to, bring that up and mention him that, he shouldn't be forgotten. In my eyes, he stands in the realms of the greats like George Carlin. And George Carlin and Robin Williams, I don't know. I've always kind of seen... Come on in, man. Yeah, no worries. Yeah, it's live, just so you know. I was talking to viewers out there. What I was about to say, something I've been wanting to talk about for a while, is for some reason, I see our comedians today, that we call comedians, as really our philosophers of today. Back in those Greek days, you would have the random philosophers on the mound or in the street talking.
Right.
And when you look at that correlation, we have our same guys that are standing on stage with a random crowd of people around them speaking. And I don't know, I've always seen our comedians, almost as philosophers, and they have this ability to pull out the human experience and put a spin on humor on anything, some of the darkest things. They're able to do that too. It speaks to the power of the tongue. But I just have always seen, I see George Carlin not as a comedian. I see George Carlin as a philosopher. And he was a speaker that knew how to control a room with humor. But he was a philosopher, not a comedian, in my eyes. And Robin Williams speaks to that to me. And he was speaking about his struggle with drugs and alcohol and depression, and almost philosophizing about that, and used humor to do it. And talk about some of the darkest things that many of us experience in our lives at times. And could put that spin on it. And to me, that's way more than a jokester. You know what I mean? That's way more than that.
Yeah, it seems like the best comedians take what they're communicating, sometimes in the darkest corners of themselves, and the same way they've learned to cope with that. In their case, they use humor as a buffer between them and that human experience out there.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, some of the most humorous people we know, so like the cliche that, behind a clown face is someone pretty sad. And oftentimes that's true because, they push away the sadness with that humor.
Sure.
But at the same time, they're examining it, and they're trying to find some bright aspect of it where it brings humor to other people, but other people relate to that source of where it's coming from, but allows them to look at things that otherwise they couldn't, because it's not completely dark when you put sort of the light of humor on it.
In the interview with Mark Maron, Robin Williams says that. He goes, in those moments on stage, therapy. And that's how he would say it.
Yeah.
And that was his therapy, and he saw it as that, just like you speak it. That was his release.
Well, it takes things that we oftentimes we're dwelling on something, just thinking about it over and over, laying in bed at night with that tape loop going. And because we're only seeing it from the dimensions that tape loops allows us to see it. I think with comedians sometimes they're able to take you outside of the box to look at things in ways that, yeah, from this perspective, it's humorous. They teach us to learn how to laugh at ourselves, where sometimes we take ourselves way too serious.
Sure.
Even in some cases, aspects of life too serious. Where some things are worth laughing about and some things are worth crying about. But there's a fine line that at some point in time, you're able to look beyond the pain and see the joy. And that
sometimes they don't.
Well, we see that a lot of times in grief. How a lot of ethnic families that I know well, they have their wakes, and it's to find, something to celebrate the person's life with, the joy of knowing him, instead of focusing on that small aspect of the pain of the loss in that moment.
That's what I've always said. To me, sometimes the idea of the funeral, even, it's a weird thing to me. I mean, the funeral, not at the funeral itself maybe, but like viewings, I don't know, but it's such a weird ritual to me, and never been a fan. I just don't. I don't know.
Well, it's cultural.
I mean, definitely. If it's not. I mean, it was in my culture too. I mean, that was typical, But it's an odd ritual for me. Re-experiencing that. I'm so much more about the celebration, of what was or what is sometimes.
Well, I mean, it's.
But those are things like we're talking about. Sorry to interrupt you.
That's okay.
I'm just on that kick about the comedians. But they can take those type of subjects. I promise you, somewhere out there, and Joe Rogan would find it. He would find the comedian that's talked about it. But somewhere, someone has talked about a viewing. I promise you that. And they've taken the viewing and made probably some bit about it that may be one of their killers.
Yeah.
But that's the ability that they have, is they can take a ritual such as that has some loving and some dark aspects to it, depending on how you perceive it, but and turn it to some punchline.
There's movies what's the movie Murder on the Way to the Funeral? Yeah, it's really pretty hilarious actually. The British version is awesome.
Yeah.
But it takes something that's, viewed as something dark, but it puts the light on aspects of it too. And so that's where comedians always give us that contrast away from the darkness. And if we get far enough in the darkness, it allows us to be objective, where we can actually see, and understand our emotions, where they're just not completely enveloped in pain.
So by talking about the darkness, they bring light to the dark.
Absolutely.
And does that speak to therapy?
Yeah, and you have to, everyone says, well, how do you benefit from that thing that went wrong or that loss?
Yeah.
Well, they're showing you, they're helping you feel emotions, the flip side of that. And that perspective still allows you to grieve and cope and deal with issues. But you're not as consumed in that dark spot of that dwelling on the death itself. Maybe that represents what? Maybe 2% of someone's life. Why let the 2% take away from the 90% to celebrate? And by removing them, it helps ease that pain. In a lot of ways, that's why they became comedians who are dealing with a lot of emotional pain, because they learned either I can dwell on this and get down and become tearful or whatever, or I can find some humor in it. And humor became the primary way of coping. But as I said in my last
because you talked about Robin.
In the Ustream I was talking about, you can't allow yourself to become the emotion, and they fought against it by finding that joy, that light. Because if you say, like I said in this last thing, if you say I'm depressed, then you define yourself as someone that you don't like. If you don't like the emotion, and if you think depression sucks, and then you say I'm depressed, then you're saying you suck. And so you get caught in that mind, and now you're bringing things out of the environment to support that emotion.
Yeah.
What Robin Williams did, and George Carlin, and Jonathan Winters, and
Mitch Hedberg. I love Mitch Hedberg.
Eddie Murphy. I mean, all these people, they gave us a chance to step back far enough.
You meant Richard Pryor, not Eddie Murphy.
Well, both are excellent. And I thought Murphy's good too.
I'm still.
Well, I'm not talking about a current comedians
well,
too.
all right.
I mean, there are people still doing this.
Well, come on, I'm a comedy fan. Let me tell you.
Okay.
I mean, I listen religiously to so many of them.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of follow it like baseball cards. It's weird. I mean, because some guys are really
It's
good.
pretty weird, actually.
No, I mean, because I see them as philosophers to a point. That's my point.
Well, some people think that's pretty weird too, but it's true.
Well, that's how I see it.
Yeah.
I mean, they really speak to that. I mean, you know, from Joe Rogan to all of them that are still doing it, you know,
Right.
obviously.
Right.
You know, they find that. I think you were going somewhere, and I cut you off.
Yeah, that's fine. No, I'm just saying it goes on, and it becomes an excellent way of coping. Because when you're laughing, you're developing serotonin. It does lift your spirits.
Mhm.
I mean, 5 minutes of laughter, I mean, really changes your whole physiology.
Yeah.
So our body wants to laugh every bit as much, if not more, than it wants to cry. Because we're avoiding the pain. We're trying to find the joy.
Mhm.
So sometimes you have to, when you walk away from something that's hurtful, why are you walking away? Well, because you decided, I can't deal with that anymore. Where's that coming from? Well, physiologically, I'm sort of enough already.
Avoiding it.
Yeah, so
In the physical,
I mean, the
avoiding
body,
the mental.
whether it's laughter or distancing or becoming physical, working out, whatever, sometimes our body, we have to follow that lead, because when our head's too full of emotions, our body still has a chance to sort of put its input in. And as we know how the brain is wired, what you do affects how you feel more than how you feel affects what you do.
Yeah.
So if I'm doing
Yeah, if you're doing comedy, I was about to say, I mean, you're on the road, you're hitting the same shows, you know, getting new material constantly.
and it's a feedback, it's symbiotic. I mean, they're doing it to relieve themselves of that darkness, but it's amped up big time by the applause, the laughter. I mean, so
Which
other
would point to why the bombing is looked at as so painful. You know, from what I understand, you know, the comedians talk about how bombing is just, oh my gosh, it's just the thing you avoid most. It just kills, you know, as Joe would say, you know, it's killing.
well, I mean, they're
killers.
putting their cup out, but if no one fills it with water, they're still thirsty,
Mhm.
And that's why all entertainers, a large part of, if there's like an emotional addiction to it, it's that adoration, it's that the laughter they get back, the joy, the applause.
Yeah.
It validates them too, because if there's a lot of pain in there, they don't want to define themselves based on how they feel, but what they do and how they're perceived. So when someone's applauding me and someone's cheering, then all of a sudden that aspect of them that needs validation, acceptance, approval, everything, because they really fell in love because of that depression or whatever.
Yeah.
Now they're treating it. So in that moment they feel great,
Yeah.
but they need more because it goes away when it gets
I'll tell you
quiet.
now, there are some comedians that I'd probably tell you that love the quiet boo room. You know, the people that heckle them. You know, because some of them vent that way. There's tons of classic heckler versus comedian stage presence. You know what happened. I mean, Bill Burr is one of the greatest. Everyone knows, but there's a bunch of them. But I know there's some really comedians out there that are dark enough to where they almost crave that heckler, that moment to where they kind of go off script, and then just vent how they're feeling at the moment, and like fuck the script and the jokes, you know, and just dive in, you know, and then seize that moment. I mean, I know some that do it for the rush, you know, that moment of getting out and hoping you don't bomb, you know. But I think all in all, though, speaks to the most. It's a venting process because it's an art form. You know, it's being yourself. It's not easy. So I mean, you have to paint you have to paint that picture of dark possible things in life and make people laugh. I mean, if you didn't know George Carlin to be a comedian, couldn't see the crowd or hear the laughter, and just listen to him talk, you wouldn't laugh. You know what I mean? He's covering some serious shit. But when you add the crowd, the fact you know he's a comedian, our perception of what the information we're taking in changes.
Right.
And we're quick to laugh for a straight hour and a half, you know?
Well, and that's a good point. The idea that, there's different ways of coping.
Yeah.
When you think of comedians, it's typically someone who's trying to bring joy and to hear it. But there's another way of coping is with anger.
Sure.
and then you'll see people more on attack mode, like certain comedians who really attack members of the audience.
The audience. Remember, Kinnison used to go off.
Kinnison, Don Rickles. I mean, it goes way back in the '60s. Different comedians, but it's almost an anger that comes from it. And the people that are really enjoying that are people that need to vent their own anger, so they're doing it vicariously by hearing this other guy, going on. So that speaks of a different torment for that particular comedian, I think.
Ooh, torment. Man,
and that's, I mean, how they're trying to negotiate that. Like I say, some do it through joy and laughter, and some are angry. And I mean, they also know how to relate in the sense
some don't give a fuck.
Yeah, but there's got to be a passion, I think, behind it, though. Because if someone just stands up and says jokes, I mean, it's not really funny. It's the body language, performance, the nonverbals. They're able to relate to the crowd and how they're responding to them, and that's where the timing issue comes in. To be a good comedian, you have to have good timing, but that's also to anticipate the reaction and how to gain that reaction. You're assessing the crowd you're with, and I know how long they need to wait to hear that.
The way you're talking, it makes them sound like a mentalist. Like they walk out and with 200 people, 2,000 people in the crowd. I mean, that's really what they are doing, though.
Well, and it's unconscious,
reading the group think.
But it becomes natural, and particularly part of it's developed because if they start to define themselves on entertaining, then they've been trying to entertain probably since they've been kids, and they're that member of the family, often the youngest child, that's trying to make everyone laugh, everyone be happy. So that child would become sort of down, depressed, morose about something. Probably he would have to perform, but the reaction of other people then become how he alleviates feelings he doesn't want to cope with. And unfortunately, like the comedian or the member of your family or anyone you're trying to get approval from, and you need them to react so you can feel, maybe the comedian to some extent develops a codependent relationship on the crowd.
Yeah. There's some that I've heard talk when they talk about if they haven't been on the stage in a while, how they miss it. They crave it almost like a drug to a point where it's like I haven't had it in a while. And some take a break from it for a while.
Right.
Man, it does sound like a therapy or a drug, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's almost like comedians. You say philosophers, but you put the message. It's sort of comedians are maybe can't amount to being a rapper, where you're processing important things, meaningful things, and they're getting that out in a sense of poetry and rhythm that they're getting a response from that. So musically would be another way of trying to get that approval, acceptance. Rapping, to get that message about that poetry. The same way the comedians communicating something they have an issue with or something that's meaningful to them.
Yeah.
But they're able to do it in such a way that they can entertain that crowd. How could something so obvious be so invisible? And when they realize, why didn't I? Or I was anticipating that coming. Whatever it is, that clarity that the comedian gives. The reason they're laughing is because what they said is compatible with who they are. Like, it wouldn't be funny to me if I didn't relate to it.
Right.
So they're finding parts within themselves that they haven't used, like comedy as a way of really treating those things. And it gives them relief to hear it because they weren't using it. That's why they were dealing other ways of dealing with it. Drugs, alcohol, avoidance, minimize, whatever. But now they found that comedian just made me laugh about something that pisses me off.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden,
now you relate to him.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's why I'm applauding after. Thanks for that little emotional fix there. But then that angry comedian would be the same way. If he is blasting everything, but he's putting something that they didn't see it from that perspective, and which makes it amusing. It's like I wouldn't have looked at, or that's funny that they put it that way, or make a cartoon out of it or something.
Yeah.
But it's still meant to be pretty angry, and that satisfies and mutes some feelings other people would have in a way that normally they don't cope that way. So the newness of it also is somewhat of a relief, and that's why whether it's music, whatever, that distracts us away from feelings we don't want to feel. It becomes something that becomes a need that we want to pursue.
So in a way, the comedians are therapists.
Yeah, I think
And
that's true.
in therapy.
Yeah, I mean, musicians are therapists.
Right.
Any painters, artists. I mean, if we're distracted from our own misinterpretations of the pains of our past, or however you want to put it, wow, that painting just, in that moment, all I'm thinking about is that painting or that song, just hearing it.
Yeah.
Or the humor that's distracted me, that's making me feel better. I mean, oftentimes when it comes down to it, we're often looking out into the world for distractions,
Yeah.
to be distracted, but also to think of something beyond what we would have thought had we just continued to dwell on the pain. There's limits to what we can deal with.
Yeah.
And kids are a good example. At a funeral, you know, sometimes they seem inappropriate. They're running around laughing,
Right.
you know, and next moment they're crying, and then they're playing games and trying to tackle each other in front of the casket or whatever. And, you know, parents are always, you know, trying to, that's not appropriate, you know, chastising. But that's how kids grieve. At that age, they can't take a steady dose of the pain of what this represents. So they tend to grieve in spurts. And so they're down a little bit, but then they got the right idea. Then they go out and play, laugh, have a good time, and they deal with another spurt. And then another. So with adults, we tend to focus longer on things because of our own significance. At different ages, I mean, you start to feel your own mortality.
I was going to say, because our own possibly created significance.
Yeah.
But I think that the object of the ability to reason deeper with the information that we've collected over the years of experience provides us that ability to the children. But that's an interesting metaphor, though, to that. You know, like kids, you know, working through it in spurts and how they move around that way. I mean, that point that maybe that's why I listen to so much comedy, is that idea that I see it almost as therapy. Is that, you know, or I see them as philosophers.
Absolutely,
So when you're listening to that, it sparks different ways of looking at things, common things that we all experience as, you know, the human species. And they do, and comedians are even beginning to travel over to places like China and a couple other. I mean, so it's global, this concept of, or it's becoming even more global, the concept of the stand-up comedian, or the stand-up philosopher, man. I mean,
think about the comedian. What are they really doing but cognitive therapy? I mean, what
they're changing
doing,
the way the crowd is thinking about something.
Exactly. They're giving them a new perspective.
Wow.
And I mean, that is the basis of cognitive therapy.
It's
you know,
true. Change.
I'm reframing this picture to have you look at it another way.
And make you laugh.
And I never looked at it that way, but that is kind of funny.
Holy shit.
That's cognitive reframing. But they do it with words in a way that it seems more conversational. It's less threatening because I don't even know this person. So I can think about it pertains to me and it doesn't personalize it. But if I look at it that way, it doesn't seem so bad. Or if I look at it that way, I'm not as angry.
So we should add a really good comedian to our team therapy team.
Yeah, because there's a lot of people out there that use humor now in schools, in clinics.
I mean, look at all the advertising. You know, if you see it in advertising, the research has been done.
Right.
Because they're spending millions. So if they're spending millions designing Super Bowl ads to be the funniest things possible, then you know it's got to have some strength there. I mean, shoot, it's almost like a guaranteed job going to be a comedian, right? Because we're all. Those are the same. You could call them genetic species heartstrings that the concept that Facebook and beginning with MySpace and these new social media sites, the ideas of following like Twitter, create this idea, the same concept that I'm getting feedback from a crowd or followers. People have accepted me. I mean, those words are chosen for certain reasons. You know, there's a reason where it's accepting a friendship or your friendship request was accepted. You know, so when you have followers on Twitter, it pulls that same, you know, that same concept is that I'm getting confirmation, man. But yeah,
good stuff.
Yeah, man. I guess I'm kind of dedicating the show as much as it means anything to Mr. Robin Williams because I remember being young and watching him being as one of the first stand-ups I'd ever really seen. I would watch the Bill Cosby himself, who was great himself, and I would catch some Richard Pryor and Williams and Robin Williams and George Carlin, and those were kind of my basis when I was younger, listening to comedy to begin with.
Yeah.
And it was a tragedy. So I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just grateful that he was able to be here, and I think the more people talk about his story, the more people talk about what he experienced, share the shows like the one on Mark Maron's show, and share his voice, that there's a chance that, it's not in vain. If it can save a couple lives, and let people know that, even giants of industry fall and are subject to these things, that you're not alone in what you're going through. But also speak to the seriousness of what that does to people's lives.
Yeah, I mean, just an important message that still I want people to remember that there's people that are watching or that'll be hearing later. If they're feeling that they don't want to feel this way anymore,
Yeah.
They want to just get rid of the pain. Because for so long, like I said, they've defined themselves as the pain.
Yeah.
I use the example if a bully was beating up a little kid. You don't want to destroy the little kid, you want to destroy the bully. And that's why get some help if you're coping with depression. If you feel you've normalized it, well, that's just the way I am. But I always am down, I'm isolating, I'm things that used to be enjoyable are no longer enjoyable. I'm starting to feel, sort of what's the point? Just understand what that is are the emotions that are affecting you, but they're not the emotions that are defining you. If you were truly a depressed person, it would not bother you. In fact, the more it bothers you, the more far removed you are from actually being that person. The same way, remember I used the example, if there's a splinter in your finger, the reason it hurts, it doesn't belong there. So love the person that's not okay with that. But then take it a step farther and do something by talking to some people about it and getting it evaluated. Because, again, what's tragic is the person that actually was destroyed by the emotion that was perceived by the person to be them. And so they destroyed the feeling, and along with it, they took the person with them. So just try to remember, separate situation from self. Oftentimes they're worlds apart, and if they don't feel right, it's because it's not compatible with who you are. So
it's a good way to end the show, man. I appreciate that. Choice words, good words. Hope you take heed to those words. If you're feeling that way, there is help out there. Like he said, you are not depression, so don't even say that you are depressed. You're being affected by depression. As Leo has said many times, and I say now, you wouldn't say that I am headache. So say that, I'm being affected by depression, that you're not depression. But if you're feeling those things, please find help. Make a phone call to somebody, but seek out that help, please. But again, thank you to Robin Williams and the other comedians that keep us laughing and keep us looking at life differently. Please keep doing your work. You're helping a lot of people out there, and for those of you, celebrate Robin Williams, listen to his stuff, talk to him, share his story, possibly with your kids or with family members that may be struggling with something similar. Allow his story to echo on and possibly help some people out. Again, appreciate that, man. Appreciate you joining me, Leo. It's a good night. We'll see you next Thursday at 6:30. You can tune in to Leo's show at truthnotemotion.com. That's also where you can book myself or Leo. We do a couple different types of therapy. Leo does the individual therapy. I do life transition counseling, but essentially